big, nice big title screen, Corporate Transparency Act, with a busy little picture over here on the right.
Yep.
Fantastic. So dumb, it's so easy, even a dumb lawyer can do it. Well, Deborah, you just let me know when my cue is, and I will take it away.
I think we can give it one more minute.
Fair
Always
enough.
one more minute. It's 12:07. We'll wait till 12:08. We're ready.
Fantastic. Did you want to do an intro, or you just want me to get started?
Chuck, you got an intro? I think you better just get started.
I'll just get started. Looks like Chuck's on mute.
Tell us about
hey, there's. I apologize. Operator error here. So yes. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. We have Tom Misteli, chamber member, an attorney who's going to walk us through the Corporate Transparency Act. Tom, I had the idea to bring you on board for this because I believe it was maybe earlier this year at East Dallas Networking, you had said that this is something that's going to affect just about everybody in the room. If it affects just about everybody in the room at East Dallas Networking, I know it does for the chamber as well. I wish we had greater attendance on this because I would imagine that most people could use this information, but I'm very, very thankful to have you here. Walk us through what we need to know, and let's get this done.
Right on. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. Chuck, thank you for the kind invitation to come and present. I did some time ago mentioned to Chuck that this Corporate Transparency Act is something that will probably affect many small businesses here in the Dallas area and everywhere else for that matter. But obviously our area of focus here today is members of the Greater East Dallas Chamber. And as a member of the Chamber, I am certainly happy to present this information as a benefit to my community. I live in Old Lake Highlands, practice in Old Lake Highlands and points beyond. So I'm happy to help my neighbors. Of course, Chuck said that, this would also be an opportunity to briefly showcase my firm. So consider it showcased. Misteli Law Firm handles real estate, probate, estate planning, and small business matters. And if there's something that I can do to help, even if it's not in any of those practice areas, kindly let me know. And I am happy to refer people to people. And I'll have my contact info on the last slide when we open the floor for questions. So folks that might want to get in touch with me will know how to do that. And so today we're talking about the Corporate Transparency Act. And Did my slide advance? It did not, did it?
Well, let's see. It's not advancing on my. There we go. Okay. There we go. All right, got it.
All right. So what is the CTA, or the Corporate Transparency Act? It was enacted as part of the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2020. It did not, however, take effect until January 1st, 2024. So that's why we're hearing about it just now. And that's why this year it's become important. It's implemented by the Financial Crimes and Enforcement Network. Short for that is FinCEN. You'll hear folks refer to FinCEN. My slides will refer to FinCEN. And FinCEN is the enforcement agency that's responsible for all of this business. What is the Corporate Transparency Act? It is intended to fight things like money laundering, right? Thus, it comes from the Anti-Money Laundering Act. The idea, the folks in there, in their belief, I'll try to keep my opinions about this to a minimum and give you just the facts and let you decide how you feel about it and what you might think of it. Because what I think of it is not particularly important, but what is particularly important is understanding the law. And so that's what I'm here hoping to share with you. It requires reporting companies, and we'll talk about what a reporting company is, to file some sort of report with FinCEN that identifies two groups. So there are really three things here that we want to identify. We want to identify what the reporting company is and isn't. The list of isn'ts is rather short and probably not relevant to anybody on the Zoom today. Who is a beneficial owner and who is a company applicant? And if you have any involvement with the federal government at all, whether it be with the IRS or any other agency, you may know that things are not always as intuitive as one might hope. So, for example, the Corporate Transparency Act gives people the mistaken idea, that this only applies to corporations, and that could not be any farther from the truth. In fact, what we think of when we think of corporations, when we think of General Motors or General Electric or Procter and Gamble or Coca-Cola, right? When we think corporation, at least I do, I think of those sort of big entities, Fortune 500, Fortune 50, and this, in fact, does not apply to those folks. This applies to smaller businesses, including businesses that are not corporations, including businesses that are limited liability companies, limited liability partnerships, et cetera. So if you run your business under the umbrella of an LLC, that you filed some paperwork with the Secretary of State here in Texas, then you are most likely going to have to report. See if I can advance this slide. I apologize for.
Probably have to do it, so you just tell me when.
Oh, well then, next slide, please. So since January 1st, FinCEN rolled out the e-filing system, and it is actually, we'll look at a screenshot in a little bit. It is actually not, as far as a federal government platform goes, it is not too bad. Although I have some suggestions for you that you may not want to, if you need to do some filing, you may not want to use all of the features of the e-filing system, but we'll talk about that in a minute. The reports can be filed and individuals can obtain FinCEN identifiers, whatever that is, on FinCEN's website. And there is the address. It's www.fincen.gov/BOI, Bravo Oscar India. BOI stands for Beneficial Owner Information. The idea is that money launderers are using companies, smaller companies, shell companies, that kind of thing. If you watch any, any Law and Order that deals with the mob or, the firm, we've got lots of shell companies. And the idea is that the same individuals are involved with many of these. And so by identifying some of these folks, perhaps they can identify some common thread. And the impact of this is some somewhat personally intrusive reporting of folks' personal information, which we'll talk about in a bit. The final regs went into effect in February. FinCEN has been very good about updating their FAQs on the website as questions come up. And as you'll see there, as of May, over 1.7 million entities had filed their reports, which is a large number, except they expect a much larger number to be filed in total. Next slide, please. So the question people ask is this intrusive sort of thing unconstitutional or not? We won't spend a lot of time talking about that. This might be of more interest to other attorneys that I might give this presentation to, but some of you may have heard about it. And if you've been paying attention, there is a case called National Small Business United v. Yellen in Alabama. That court found that this was federal overreach, and that the kind of information that FinCEN is asking for is overly broad, and that they could not ask for that information from members of the National Small Business Association. The court scoped its ruling, limited its ruling only to the plaintiff before it, being the Small Business Administration, or I'm sorry, the National Small Business Association. And to answer the question that often comes up about this, if you become a member of the National Small Business Association tomorrow, does that mean you do not have to report? And the answer, regrettably, is no, it does not mean that. That only small businesses that were members of the NSBA as of the time the ruling came down are covered by the ruling. So it is a rather narrow group of folks who are covered by this court decision. FinCEN has appealed the decision, and so we will see what happens in the appeals court. That will take months, if not a year or more, to rattle its way around. Cases in other jurisdictions have been filed, including one here in Texas. Next slide, please. So how do you file a report? And this is a screenshot of that website that I gave you, the BOI reporting website that FinCEN has provided. You'll see on the right, you'll see a sort of typical looking online form that you can fill out. And you'll see that this screenshot is numbers 35 to 42. So on screens prior to this in part 1 and part 2, there are the first 34 items, but it is a sort of a typical fillable form. However, I will suggest that folks use the PDF instead. And you can see on the left, there are the two options. You can file your online BOI report, or you can file a PDF BOI report. And the reason at least today, the reason that the PDF report is a better option is because the information that you enter online is not sticky. And what I mean by sticky is you cannot come back a day or a week or a month later and log on and have all that information auto-populate for you to make any changes that you might need to make. You will need to fill out each and every bit of information, at least right now. Perhaps a future revision of the website will change this, but for now, you cannot make any changes online without completely submitting a new report. That is time-consuming and cumbersome, especially if you're involved with perhaps a larger organization that has some folks coming and going, where you might need to change this information periodically. So the fillable PDF option allows you to fill it in on your own time, at your own pace, save it. And then if you should need to make changes in the future, you can find that saved fillable PDF on wherever you saved it on your computer, and you can open that fillable PDF and you can make changes to that information in the fillable PDF, resave it, resubmit it. Many folks have found that is perhaps a little more time consuming in the beginning, that the online form might be a little easier to navigate than the fillable PDF. But once you invest the time, the fillable PDF allows you to fill it out in pieces. So if you just wanted to fill out one part today and one part tomorrow and one part the next day, you could do that. You would not have the option to do that in the online form. But once that is completed, that PDF is completed, you'll see that button there to submit the BOIR, and you would still submit that PDF through this website. So now that we've talked about what this thing is and how you make reports, let's go to the next slide, please, and talk about who needs to report. And the entities that need to report are what the law calls, what CTA calls a reporting company. And a reporting company is defined as a domestic entity created by the filing of a document with a Secretary of State. So as I said, if you filed a certificate of formation with the Secretary of State, or you had an attorney do it, if you filed some sort of form with the Secretary of State here in Texas or in another state, if your legal entity is a Nevada registered corporation or a Delaware registered limited liability partnership, it's all 50 states. That includes recognized Indian tribes, and it includes the territories. So everyone is covered under the umbrella. And similar foreign entities, if for some reason you're involved with, let's say, a limited partnership that is registered in the United Kingdom, but you are allowed to do business in the United States, it's likely that your entity will need to report as well. The exceptions are, it's a short list, and again, unlikely to apply to folks today in today's audience. It's things like folks involved with publicly traded companies, banks and credit unions, utilities, highly regulated entities that are unlikely, because of the amount of scrutiny, the type of entity it is, makes it difficult to launder money. And thus the idea here is that it is not so easy for those larger companies, but it is easier to perhaps launder money and engage in other financial malfeasance with this sort of network of related smaller companies. So that is the so what and who is a reporting company. So again, to reiterate, if you are involved with, you don't need to be an owner, and we'll talk about that later. And again, being a beneficial owner is not what you might intuitively think, but a reporting company is any entity registered with the Texas Secretary of State or similar. Next slide, please. So what must we report? And we'll talk first about the left, about the reporting company information, which is the less controversial, and then we'll move our way over to the right side and talk about what tends to give people more heartburn about the CTA. The company must report its legal name and any assumed names. So my law firm must be registered as Law Office of Thomas M. Misteli, PC, which is the legal name, the professional corporation that I am registered as. I also do business as Misteli Law Firm, so I need to register that assumed name or trade name as well. If I use any other names, I would need to include all those names in an abundance of caution. Right? Some folks will ask, well, I use some different names, but I only have one name that I've registered as a DBA. I would use any and all names that your business may be described as. That it would be unfortunate to get caught up in the pointy end of this law for leaving out some information that is not really that big a deal. So any name that you might do business as included in your reporting. The address, your primary office address, the jurisdiction. So for most of us on today's Zoom, it will be the jurisdiction will be Texas, since your entity is registered with the Texas Secretary of State. If you're wondering, is my entity registered or not, you can do a Google search for Texas Comptroller Entity Search. And I'm sorry I didn't include that on the slide, but if you just Google, again, it's Texas Comptroller Entity Search, and you put the name of your company in, it will tell you whether you're registered or not. There's also a website, SOS Direct, but you need a login and a password for that. That's a website that goes to the Secretary of State. If you're not sure if your company should be a reporting company or not, I would be happy to help you navigate those waters. Just let me know. The last piece of information you need is tax ID number, which is your entity's version of your social security number. So fairly straightforward business information, but let's now move to the right side and talk about the beneficial owners and company applicants. And this information is required for both of those categories of folks, beneficial owners and company applicants. And I'll talk about who those folks are or whom they might not be a little later on in the presentation. But here's the information that they're looking for. They're looking for your full legal name, your date of birth, your current home address, your residential address, so not the business address, and then a number, either your driver's license number, a passport number, and a clear and complete copy of that identification. So if you're going to use your driver's license, you would both provide your driver's license number and a copy of the front and back of your Texas driver's license. Some folks are not super excited about giving out that information, understandably so. The FinCEN identifier is a way to avoid having to continually use that information. But as you might imagine, a FinCEN identifier, when you go to apply for that, when you go to ask for that, it will ask you for all of that same information. So the FinCEN identifier does not reduce or restrict the amount of non-public, personally identifiable information the law requires you to disclose. It simply gives you a masking number, if you will, that you just sign up for this FinCEN identifier once, and you give all of this personal information just once, and then you can use that identifier on your FinCEN BOI reports. But for folks who are concerned about their privacy and about this non-public, personally identifiable information, it does need to be disclosed, at least to get the identifier. Next slide, please.
It didn't go.
Uh-oh.
Is that it?
Oh, no. Should have who is a beneficial owner as our next slide.
Let me get out of it and get into it again then.
Okay. I will start talking about who is a beneficial owner in the interest of time. And if you'll just follow along with me, and hopefully we'll get the slides to sync up with me. A beneficial owner is an individual who, and as you might imagine, it's a sort of legal definition, so it has lots of wiggle words or preventing wiggle, who directly or indirectly, through any contact, arrangement, understanding, relationship, or otherwise. So for those folks who think, well, I'm not really an owner because I'm not on paper as an owner, I just get money as part of profit sharing, that definition makes you a beneficial owner. That nearly any involvement with the reporting company that meets one of two or both criteria, you must report as a beneficial owner. So either you exercise substantial control, and that is a term of art. We'll talk about what the definition of substantial control is, or you own or control at least 25% of the ownership interests, and we will talk about ownership interests and what exactly that means as well. Next slide, please. So, who is a beneficial owner? If you are the only owner of the business, then you're probably a beneficial owner. And there's no probably about it. You definitely. So if you are, for example, I am the sole owner of Misteli Law Firm, or Law Office Thomas M. Misteli PC, doing business as Misteli Law Firm, I am certainly a beneficial owner. Not too tricky there. But what if you are not an owner? What if you are somebody who has a C-suite title? You're the CEO, the CFO, the COO, the CTO, the CAO, right? Any C-level title, or any other, right? Again, remember, this is the federal government. They've cast the net fairly wide. That definition that I read to you about directly or indirectly in any way with any association, coming up with some cute title that essentially means you are the CFO, but you don't have the title CFO, does not get you off the hook. If you perform the functions that a typical business would describe as the functions that a chief financial officer would exercise, or a chief operating officer, et cetera, you are going to be considered a senior officer under CTA. Also, not as intuitive perhaps, but general counsel for such a reporting company. I don't know that I have any of my colleagues on the phone or on the Zoom today, but anyone that, and it doesn't necessarily need to be, for those of you who are familiar with the idea of fractional general counsel, or even some of these C-suite roles. Some of you may actually have engaged folks as a fractional COO or a fractional CFO, where that person is not an employee of your company. They are a consultant that you've paid, and they are, let's use just the CFO as an example, they handle all of your financial matters, and they do that. There's not enough for them to be hired on as a full-time employee. So you pay them for a number of hours a week or a month, and they handle your financial operation. And they handle it not just for you, but they handle it for other entities as well. And their business model is that they're not just the CFO for one company, but they're a part-time CFO for many companies. And if you have an arrangement like that, that person is also likely to be expected to register as a beneficial owner. That person is someone who FinCEN will almost certainly decide, if it needed to come to that, would almost certainly decide that they exercised substantial control. Another prong of substantial control is bringing on or getting rid of any senior officer, or if there's a board, a majority of the board. So if you are somebody who has authority, perhaps with others, it doesn't have to be your sole authority, but if you and two other people have the authority to get rid of the board, to reorganize the board, it doesn't matter what your title is, it doesn't matter what your ownership share is, they consider that to be substantial control. Does that person have direction, determination, or substantial influence over important matters? That is a broad enough definition to drive a large truck through. Again, right, if we're seeing a theme here, the theme is that I keep wanting to refer to the IRS because this seems like the draconian kind of thing the IRS would be involved in. it is FinCEN, this financial crimes enforcement network. They've taken the same position that they want to cast the net wide. And then they hold any other form of substantial control. So if the above definitions weren't broad and vague enough, there's a catch-all, any other form of substantial control. So when in doubt, report it out, is my counsel as far as, am I a beneficial owner or not? While I think that everybody probably has some level of discomfort in providing that kind of information, and that it's going to be stored in some database somewhere, and we hear every week or month about data breaches and that sort of thing, I think that potential risk perhaps is overshadowed by the brain damage that you may experience if this becomes something where you're challenged by FinCEN for not properly reporting. But that perhaps is just my counselor at law part of my role. As the attorney at law, of course, unless I'm representing you, you decide exactly what it is that you want to do, and that's your business. But so that's who a beneficial owner is. It's a pretty broad definition. And in the next slide, please, we'll talk about an ownership interest. So either ownership or control. You don't need both. It's an or. So either you are an owner, and of course, if you are both, then it applies to you doubly, so to speak. But either category, being someone with substantial control or being someone who owns or controls directly or indirectly at least 25% of the ownership interest. It's broader than those who own equity interests. What does that mean? Perhaps if you've got a small corporation and the corporation is owned by a small number of shareholders, but perhaps you are not one of those equity shareholders in the company. We see this a lot, again, in law firms. Law firms make folks partners, and some folks are equity partners and some folks are not. But there are other ways to have an ownership interest, profit sharing, convertible stocks, all things that may perhaps be a little more complex than your typical small business owner would have. I share all this here with you to once again underline the importance of not trying to weasel out. If you don't like that term, I'm sorry. It's just what came to my head. If you are looking for a way to not register as a beneficial owner because there's some sort of tricky, cute way things are structured, the chances are that FinCEN is not going to agree with your definition, that FinCEN is likely to see some sort of direct or indirect connection. And so again, my counsel as counselor at law would be for folks to err on the side of caution when reporting. Next slide, please. So who is a company applicant? We know who, now we know that there's a very broad definition of who a beneficial owner is. And in fact, you don't need to be an owner at all. Who is a company applicant? There are two people or two categories of people that qualify as company applicants, or that are considered company applicants by FinCEN. The folks who actually file the documentation. So for example, if you were to come to me and you would like to create a new entity, let's say right now, you are a sole proprietorship. And perhaps I apologize, perhaps I should have mentioned that sooner. Sole proprietorships are not reporting companies, because as a sole proprietor, so if I just was hanging out my shingle as Tom Misteli, doing business as Misteli Law Firm, and I did not have some legal entity, I have a Texas professional corporation. My wife and I run a real estate side business. That's an LLC. Both of those entities, we filed paperwork with the state of Texas, and therefore both are reporting companies. However, if I did not, if I was just a sole proprietor, John Smith Painting Contractors, Bill's Electrical, or Bill Johnson, doing business as Bill's Electrical. Bill is not a beneficial owner and his company is not a reporting company. But let's say Bill comes to me and says, hey, I would like, for whatever reason, I would like to create an LLC, and I would like Bill's Electrical to become, rather than under my personal liability, Bill's Electrical LLC. So when he comes to me to do that filing, and I ask my assistant to actually file the paperwork with FinCEN, or with the Secretary of State, if I ask her to file the LLC paperwork, that she actually goes in, she didn't fill out any of the forms, she just goes online and uploads the form to the state of Texas, that makes her a company applicant for purposes of the CTA. And because I am the individual responsible for directing or controlling the filing, that she filed it under my direction, I would also be a company applicant. And so when Bill's Electrical LLC becomes registered, then Bill's Electrical LLC, becomes a reporting company. If Bill owns the company alone, he is the sole beneficial owner. And then I and my assistant both are company applicants. And we all need to provide that same information. The so what behind that is it's not just these individuals that may be creating these companies to launder money. There may also be lawyers, accountants, etc., folks who are setting these things up on somebody else's behalf, and they're trying to create this network of information that they can look to if they're investigating money laundering or other sorts of fraud. And likewise, if Bill was going to fill out his own paperwork, it's easy enough to do. Bill could fill out his own paperwork to send to the Secretary of State. If Bill fills out the certificate of formation and he files it himself, then that's it. He just needs to file as the beneficial owner, register as the beneficial owner, and identify himself as the company applicant. But if he asks his receptionist to actually go online and upload it, then she needs to be a company applicant as well. For those of you who are thinking, holy crap, I have no idea who formed my entity, that's probably because your entity was formed sometime before January 1st of this year. And if that's the case, you're in luck because this company applicant piece is only required for entities that are formed on or after January 1st of this year. So Misteli Law Firm does not need to report who its company applicants are because we've been around since 2016. But this Bill's Electrical, for example, or if somebody formed a new entity sometime this year, the company applicant would need to be reported. Next slide, please. When must these reports be made? And it depends on when your entity was formed. So let's assume, for sake of discussion, that many of you on the Zoom today are folks who are involved with an entity that has existed since before January 1st of this year. That gives you until January 1st, 2025, so the rest of this calendar year. That gives your entity that long. We're in the beginning of August, so you've got 4 months and change to do this. It's not a particularly rather complicated form, but it's easy to put off. I would recommend not putting it off. So if it has not hit your to-do list yet, or if there's somebody in your entity that it should be on their to-do list and it might not be, and you are a beneficial owner, I would let somebody know, hey, this needs to happen, because being a beneficial owner makes you as responsible for this as anybody else. So if you are, let's say, the CFO, and you shrug your shoulders and go, oh, well, it was the COO's responsibility to take care of this, that probably is not sufficient. That as a beneficial owner, the onus is on you to be sure that it's taken care of. You don't need to do the filing yourself. You just need to be sure that it gets done if somebody else is going to be doing the doing. If your entity was formed sometime this year, you have 90 days from the date of formation, and their intent starting next year is for a 30-day reporting period. So that is a fairly short timeline. It will be most important to those folks who do this kind of thing on their own, that folks that feel like, oh, I don't need to hire a lawyer, I don't need to use a company like Corporation Services, I don't need, right, I can do it myself. Yes, you can, but will you remember to file this FinCEN report or not? And then perhaps the most draconian requirement is that regardless of when your entity is formed, you have 30 days after any change to file updates to your report. This is another reason why using FinCEN identifiers for all your individuals, both for your beneficial owners and for your company applicants, it is better to use the FinCEN identifier, because the FinCEN identifier is the responsibility of the person holding it. And so if I move and I have a FinCEN identifier, it is my responsibility to go online and change my address with FinCEN, and I'm supposed to do that within 30 days. So anybody who's initially registered needs to be made aware that they need to update that FinCEN identifier on their own. Now, of course, if you're one of those people, perhaps you would prefer the entity be responsible for doing that. But then remember, the entity is responsible for all of that information. So if we're not using FinCEN identifiers and we're filing the report with the driver's license number and the date of birth and the home address of our CEO, our CFO, our CTO, and our COO, and we're not using the FinCEN identifier, then it's important that somebody in the organization know that any changes to the information for those folks, so that doesn't just mean hiring and firing, but that means moving across town or next door, that needs to be done within 30 days under the law. Next slide, please. What happens, and here's kind of the so what. Who cares? Well, if you willfully provide or attempt to provide, or if you willfully fail to report, you pay up to a $591 a day civil penalty. You can also be liable for a criminal fine of up to $10,000 and the possibility of going to the pokey for up to 2 years. So they have put some teeth into this. Remember, I said at the beginning, less than 2 million people as of May. They expected 30 plus people, 32 million, I think it was, total entities to register in 2024. So let's say there are 30 million entities that don't report. What is FinCEN going to do? So people may think to themselves, it's pretty unlikely that FinCEN is going to find out about my little company not being registered, not having filed this report. And that may be true. But is that a risk you want to take? And my point here, and the whole so what for me with you being here today, is to let you know what the law is, what the potential consequences are. And remember everything that I just said about the civil penalties and the criminal penalties. That's about willfully providing. But of course, I think FinCEN will make a fairly strong argument that if you knew about it and you didn't provide it, that was willful. I won't tell them that we were here today. If anybody comes and asks me, I've never met any of you. So if FinCEN comes and asks me if I've told you about the CTA, the answer is no. All right, but all kidding aside, there are still penalties for negligently providing, but they are certainly not as strict as the willfulness. Next slide, please. So this sort of reiterates, this was an FAQ that FinCEN came out with. Both individuals and the entities can be held liable. So just because you might be somebody who, for example, is the chief financial officer of your small corporation, but you don't have any ownership stake, you're simply a salaried employee, you're still undoubtedly a beneficial owner under the terms, and you can be held liable as an individual if your corporation or other legal entity does not file. So please know that it is a sort of joint and several liability. Next slide, please.
Did it move?
Not yet.
Okay. Okay.
And this is a question I often get. Who can access this information? And the list of people with access to this information is supposed to be very short. It is not publicly available information. It is not like, for example, your certificate of formation that you filed with the Secretary of State. If you have a login to the Secretary of State's website, you can go and download the certificate of formation that you filed with the Texas Secretary of State. You cannot, unless you are one of these entities below in the bullet points, you cannot, for any reason at any time, access this information. All right, so it's government agencies and law enforcement, financial institutions doing their due diligence and compliance, or the Department of the Treasury, because FinCEN rolls up under the Department of the Treasury. Now, so that means that it can't be subpoenaed, it cannot be obtained through a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request. It is not publicly available. However, skeptics will argue that the information is stored electronically, and folks may have varying levels of trust in the federal government in keeping electronically stored information safe. Can't answer that, but different folks have different opinions about that. Next slide, please. So what's next? We've got litigation. We've got that case in Alabama that's gone up on appeal. There is a bill that's making its way through Congress called the Repealing Big Brother Overreach Act. It would, among some other things, it would repeal the CTA if it were to pass. FinCEN continues to update their website with frequently asked questions. So as things that people ask them about it becomes obvious that these are the kinds of questions that many people have, that many folks are confused about. FinCEN has been quite diligent about making additional information available. And lastly, FinCEN has promised that they will create an enforcement mechanism, but there is not one yet. So is this just a paper tiger? Again, perhaps for you to decide. Right? My job is to share with you the information so you're well enough informed that you can make a good, solid business decision for whatever entity you might be involved with. That right now there's no enforcement mechanism whatsoever. There's the possibility that this will be repealed. by congressional action. There's the possibility that this will be overturned as unconstitutional. But for right now, it is a law that's on the books that requires a reasonably low level of action to comply. And for folks who would like to err on the side of caution, now you know a little bit about it. And I think that is about the end of my presentation, which is good because it looks like I am about out of time. If we'll click to the next slide, I think we'll have the questions slide with my contact info.
Darn it, it's not moving.
Well, dadgummit.
Let me stop sharing and try again.
Let me put my info in the chat. Tom at.
Well, if I could throw this out there too, Deborah, aren't we've got the deck, Tom's presentation here, and weren't we intent on emailing that out to the folks that attended today?
We will.
And Tom,
Excellent.
I think that has your information on there.
It does.
So folks, if you're on this presentation, check your email and we'll get that to you soon. Today, probably, but certainly by tomorrow.
Sounds great. Sounds great. And in the couple minutes we have left, does anybody have a question that they might like to ask? And there's my information. Either I have completely baffled everybody or I have answered everybody's questions. I very much hope it's the latter.
Francie's got a question.
Oh, hey, Francie.
Hey, how's it going? I do have a quick question. Our LLC has been in existence for 28 years. We had a partner retire, I don't know, 12 years ago. Since it's the same LLC, do I have to count him as a owner?
If he no longer has an ownership interest, no.
He does not. And then if I've got another partner that's going to be retiring, but I don't know when that's officially going to be, do I report him and then go in and take him back off?
I think that would be the prudent thing, is that I take a snapshot of the ownership picture today, and everybody who owns at least a 25% share in whatever that way that might be, I would report those folks. And if somebody retires, I would then, and again, this is why using the fillable PDF is sometimes a better option for folks, because then you can just pull that PDF up, you can delete him off, and you can submit the report with all the same information, except the retired partner would be removed.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Any other questions? Well, if something comes
You have
to
a site for, I'm sorry.
go ahead.
Do you have a link to the site where we can get the forms?
Yes, it's that, it's in the deck. It was fincen.gov/BOI, I believe. I've not memorized it. Let me go look at my deck just to make sure.
And again, Angelo, that'll be in the deck. We're going to send all the slides out to everybody. So you should have a hard copy, well, at least a soft copy of this. And you can find it on there if Tom can't find it here.
Yeah, it's www.fincen.gov/BOI, like Bravo, Oscar, India.
Yeah, I just got a website not available.
Interesting.
Oh, Congress worked quickly then, didn't they?
Yeah, how do you like that?
It might have been
Yeah, let me see what let me dig into that a little bit. Thank you for checking that just now. And I will let Deborah know what I find out. And when she sends the email with the deck, I'll ask her to include the URL that I confirm. I'm a little embarrassed now that
No,
I confirm is good.
try /landing, LANDING.
Let's see. Well, rather than keep everybody here while we try to make that work. Now, I got fincen.gov/BOI to work. So, and I didn't use any, right? I didn't put in anything in the beginning. make sure you're using secure HTTP, so it should be https://finsend.gov. If you're not on a secure site, you probably won't be able to access. That would be.
Angelo, did we have an operator error here?
That would be my first guess. Not that I know anything about Angelo.